Episode 3 of our Rails for Inertia series. I'm still Brandon Shar. I still work at Bellawatt, and I am still the co-creator and co-maintainer of Inertia for Rails. So this is episode 3. What have we done so far? Well, in episode 1, we installed Rails, we installed Inertia, and we took a look around and saw what all Inertia did for us, in addition to Webpack and React. In episode 2, we set up authentication with Devise, and we made sure to pass the authenticated user via Inertia down to any of the pages. We also took a little bit of a look at how Inertia handles props and the Inertia share concept for props that are going to be used very frequently. We also, as part of testing that, created a recipe resource route and resource controller, which is where we're going to start today. So if any of the things I said sound unfamiliar to you, if that is not something you're comfortable with, I recommend you go back and start with the first or second video. If all of that seems perfectly reasonable, that's something you're comfortable and confident with, or you've been following along so far, let's jump right in. So where we left off last time, we had just created this recipe route and index method. And the whole purpose of it was just to show that we really were sharing our current user prop across any Inertia page. But now it's time to actually start building that out. We want this to be a recipe app, so we're probably going to need some recipes. So let's start there. So to do that, I'm going to jump into a terminal and I'm going to use Rails to generate a model. So we're going to say Rails generate model and recipe. And if you're familiar with Rails, you know that is going to generate us a few extra things as well. The most important for right now being the migration. So what goes into a recipe? This can really be anything, but for the sake of our example, let's say that it has a name. Let's say that it has a description and it's going to belong to a user. And I think that's okay for now. If we want to add more to it, maybe difficulty, maybe time, something like that, we can add that later on down the line. But this seems like a great place to start. So with this migration created, we're going to run Rails db migrate. Perfect. We can jump into our Rails console, make sure everything worked as expected, and we should be able to run some queries. Awesome. Now, of course, as this query shows, we don't have any recipes. So let's get some. And to save us a little time and to probably create some fun results, instead of manually creating them, we are going to use a Ruby gem called Faker. Now, if you're not familiar with Faker, I think Faker is an awesome tool for testing. What Faker does is, in a number of categories, it will generate you fake randomized data. This data is normally pretty close to unique. It's not guaranteed to be unique. Faker, it actually has, right here, it actually has a method you can use to ensure it's unique. But it's pretty good randomized data, and it's fun to use. So let's use the Faker gem. So I'm just going to go to my gem file. Let's add Faker. And set the console, and we'll run bundle install. Awesome. So how do we use Faker? Well, let's jump back into a console so we can try it out. Let's make sure it's there. Perfect. So let's see that first example they had right here. Faker name. .name. And there we go. We're getting some fake names. That's awesome. If we wanted to create users with them, we could. We create anything. So let's create some seeds for our database. So Rails has this seed file here that we can use to just put some data in the database. This is really best for tools to get a dev environment up and running. And that's what we're going to use it for. So let's create, I don't know, let's create 20 recipes. That sounds about right. So we'll just say 20 times each do. We don't need the number. And we'll say recipe.create, and we need a name, and we need a description, and we need a user. The user, we'll make that easy. We'll just say, give me the first user. We have a user in here already. Normally in the seeds, it would make sense to create a user, but we already manually created one in our last video. We have our admin user. So what do we want the name to be? Well, we want it to be something. Let's take a look at what Faker has. So if we scroll down into Faker's docs, we will see all of these different things we can look at. Ran fake coffee, fake Chuck Norris, fake business, computer, construction, crypto coin, currency, and as luck would have it, and I did not plan this in advance, we have food. So this is perfect. We have, let's see, dish. That's probably closest to what we'd want for a recipe title. And we also have description. So we'll say fakerfood.dish. I'm just going to copy that. And for our description, we will use fakerfood description. Awesome. So if this works, we should be able to run Rails db seed. Unexpected end of input. Let's see, did we put a comma somewhere strange? Our parens are matched up. This isn't highlighted right. Did I not need that each, maybe? Does times accept a block directly? Let's find out. Times. Let's hello. Yes, it does. Okay, so that was our mistake right there. Oh, and there's there's all sorts of issues here. There we go. So now let's try it with actual Rails syntax. Unknown attribute user for recipe. Okay, that makes perfect sense because recipe doesn't know what that is. It has a user ID field on it, but we need to tell it that it belongs to a user. And at the same time, so we don't forget, let's go over to our user and say that he has many recipes. So third time's the charm. There we go. So let's see what we have. We're going to run our Rails console again. This time we can look at our recipe first. Awesome. We have risotto with seafood with its description, smoked salmon, poached eggs, diced red onions, and, well, I don't know how long that goes on. And we should have 20 of these. And we do. Perfect. So with data in our database, let's keep moving. So let's go back to our recipes controller and let's think about what we'd really like to have happen here. If we look at this page, all we have is a title. Brandon at bellawat.com's recipes. Should really add a username, but we'll get to that later. What we also want to include here is we want to actually now include this user's recipes. So let's do that. Let's pass some props. As we remember, props is an additional argument that you can pass to the inertia renderer, and it expects a hash of props. So we'll say recipes, and what we want is our current user recipes. So this should work great. If we refresh, no errors, but no change. Why? Well, we're not doing anything with it on the front end. So let's go to our recipe list file here. And let's take a look at what we have. So our recipe list right now is just rendering the user's recipes. Let's have it render a bit more than that. So to start, let's give this a new parent. Underneath this, we'll accept recipes as a prop, and we will map over them. Recipe. And let's just output them as a div for right now. We'll say we want the recipe name. So let's see where we at. Gonna hit refresh. There we go. We have all of the user's recipes. So this is pretty awesome. We have just used Inertia to pull some data out of the database. I shouldn't say we used Inertia for that. We used Rails to pull some data out of the database and pass it down to our Inertia component. So none of this so far has really embraced Inertia though yet, right? Like, it's cool that we have these props and it's cool that we're using React, but we certainly aren't feeling like a single page app. So let's take a look at how this would work. This obviously is a page that we will flesh out a little more later, but to start with a simple thing that you should do, I think we'd expect if you click one of these, you should probably go to a page that explains a little more in depth about that recipe. And that would be our kind of standard resource flow. So let's add that page. Let's go first to our routes and let's allow the show method. Now we'll go back to our controller and we'll add an extra method. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through this because it's standard Rails, but we will add a method here for a recipe. No, let's not add this just yet because we don't need to jump into optimizing our code. Let's just look up the recipe here. So we're going to render Inertia. We're going to have a single recipe. And what are we going to pass it? We are going to pass it the recipe we look up from the show route. If you're familiar with Rails resource routing, this is going to be called anytime you have a route that looks like this. So if the URL looks something like this, /recipes/an ID, this show route will be called, and that ID will be in the param hash for us with the index ID. So we can find the specific recipe by doing current user, because we want to make sure that you're still scoped to whoever's logged in, .recipes.find params ID. Awesome. So it's going to work just yet. We need to do a little bit more. Similar to the way we would add a view, let's add this page. Let's add recipe.js. A little bit of React boilerplate. This expects a recipe. This is standard React if you're familiar with functional components. This is a pretty normal expected way to write them. And we're going to keep using simple. Like I said, we'll get to some styling in a bit, but right now let's just keep getting some content on pages. So let's say the recipe's name. And then in a div below that, let's show the recipe's description. Cool. Let's see if this works. So let's go down here. We still have our Rails console open, so we can just say recipe.first, and we can see that it has an ID of 1. So we can go back to here, and we should be able to go to /1 to get back to our risotto with seafood recipe. And we have a syntax error. Okay, that's not a big deal. Let's figure out why. I think because we're in a hash, it's not happy with me not using parens. Rails was a little confused on the order of operations there. So there we go. We have our risotto with seafood recipe, and we have our description of it on an English muffin with a side of roasted potatoes. So this is great. Now, Obviously, we're still using the URL to navigate though. Let's start embracing a little bit of inertia here. So we're going to go back to the recipes page and let's make these links. Let's start getting into inertia front end. So we're going to go back to our recipe list page. And instead of using divs here, we're going to use a component called inertia link. Now, this component is going to be specific to whatever inertia front end you're using. So for me, I'm using inertia React. So I'm going to import from inertia React. If you're using Vue, if you're using Svelte, the syntax for this will be a little bit different, but the concept will be the same. Instead of div, or probably just inside the div, so we have links are block elements, this will work. We're going to use inertia link. Inertia link, links are not block elements, I don't know why I said that, but. And we're going to use href, the same way you would use a normal link. So I don't want to use that. I want to actually use some JavaScript because I want to interpolate the recipe's ID into the link. So where we want the user to go to is recipes / whatever the recipe's ID is. So now let's take a look at this page. Give it a second, because again, I'm not running Webpacker. And yeah, I don't know why I said links are block elements. They're absolutely not. That would make no sense. So let's do the same. Let's put back our div containing element. Let's put back our div parent here. There we go. And again, the slow reloads are because I'm not running Webpacker. Once we get into styling and we start making a lot more front-end changes, I'll make sure to start running it. You see that I have a console error. This console error is probably React being upset, and it is, yes, we are looping without a key. Let's fix that because it's just not a good habit to get into, having errors while we're checking out a new app. That should fix that. Did it not fix that? Oh, I put it on the wrong element. The key needs to go on the top level element, not any element I want. Much better. So now we have links. If we mouse over them, we can see they are links to the recipe's ID. And if we select one, now we're starting to get some inertia magic. You can't really tell from here, but if I show elements, you'll be able to see that there is indeed no redirects, or there's no full page load happening, even across going back. So we can navigate through these, and we now have a functional application. We're starting to feel like an app. So I think we're going to leave off here for now. We've made a good bit of progress here. We added a model, we added some data to that model, and we finally started embracing inertia on the front end using inertia link to navigate between these pages. When we jump back into this, we have 2 pages, 3 if you count our little hello world. It's probably time for a layout. And if you've ever had to do layouts in a single page app, it can be a bit of a pain. Luckily, Inertia has some tricks up its sleeve, and that's what we'll get into next. So for those of you who have come this far, I hope to see you in the next one.